Our next presenter is the CEO of ProKanban.org, an inclusive Kanban learning community. She is also co-founder of Scatterspoke, an Atlassian Ventures portfolio company driving actionable improvements through retrospective data. Wow. For over 25 years, she has presented, coached, and taught Agile to audiences around the world. She has worked across a range of industries with clients like Wells Fargo, E-Trade, and Home Depot, and many more. She helps organizations apply a systems thinking approach to aligning flow practices end to end. She has served as a board member for Agile Denver, the Agile Uprising, and chair of the Mile High Agile Conference. But she's happiest in the woods, camping with her 3 kids and very, very patient husband. I also ask every one of our presenters to tell me something interesting about themselves that we may not know. And it turns out, our next presenter, Colleen, as a child raised sheep and presented them at county fairs. And apparently they were award-winning sheep, so she's got a little bit of a farmer girl in him. Let's give a big round of applause for Colleen Johnson. Welcome on stage. The title of her presentation is Let Them Eat Code.
All right, thank you, John. I promise I'm going to weave some sheep stories into this talk, too, just to keep you all awake. You'll have to wait a little bit till we talk about the sheep, but we are going to talk about the sheep. I want to first see a raise of hands. Who in the room is a developer? Awesome. Okay. Who in the room is an engineering manager or engineering team lead? Okay. You guys are all in the hot seat for this talk. The idea for this topic and for this talk kind of started at the beginning of this year. I set out and I said, I want to interview a bunch of engineering leaders and ask them what their biggest pain points are. If you had a blank check, what would you throw money at? What are the things that keep you awake at night? And what are the things that are the hardest to fix? I also asked everyone I interviewed, what's the one metric you're responsible for reporting up, right? Reporting to the person who you report to. One of the more interesting answers I got to this was, well, I have to report back developer focus time. And I said, that's a really interesting metric. How do you track that? How do you measure developer focus time? And he said, well, I just ask them, how many hours of focus time do you think you got this week? Which really stresses me out that that's how that's being measured. But it got me thinking, if developer focus time is the most important thing to report on and is one of the biggest pain points that most engineering teams have, what are the things that we could be doing to make it better? Let's start with this metric, that developers spend 70% of their time not writing code. Does that feel, raise your hand if that feels accurate to you based on your work life. That is horrible. I hate that for all of you. So let's just say on average, Dan, plug your ears, we're going to talk about money for a second. If the average developer makes about $150,000 a year, 70% of that is going to be $105,000, right? If you have 10 developers, you're losing $1 million a year then, not writing code. If you have 100 developers, you're losing $10+ million a year on time spent not writing code. That's just the days that you're in the office, right? That's not even everything that happens before you become a developer on a team. When you think about all the effort that goes into hiring, recruiting, finding the best engineers to join your organization, then we're paying these great salaries, and what are you spending your time on? There's probably a lot of things that you would add to this list. And tech debt technically would be hopefully writing code or hopefully fixing some tech debt issues, but there's all these other things that are eating up your time, right? Non-coding time. Some of it is still important. I think there's some element of non-coding time that is required, but a lot of it is unnecessary meetings, status reports. Dan had somebody say to him earlier, could we stop doing stand-ups? How much time do you spend every week in stand-ups that are supposed to be quick, that carry over into an hour-long meeting about what you're working on? A lot of time spent not coding is waiting, right? Waiting for decisions, waiting for dependencies, waiting for prioritization, right? Waiting for clear direction on what to work on next. This list goes on and on and on. But so what we want to talk about is what can we do to try to reclaim some of that time back for you to be able to focus on writing great code and doing what you love to do. When we think about this, I know it's probably really easy to say you feel the pain of this, and this is frustrating to all of you as developers to not be able to focus on writing code. And I think this can manifest in a lot of different ways for teams. It can be burnout, right? So you're constantly busy but not making progress on things that matter. There's frustration of context switching all the time or working on code for one thing and then getting pulled off in a different direction and maybe something never gets deployed. And all of this can kind of manifest as really low team morale because we're busy but we're not productive. But think about who else this affects, right? Your project managers are probably pretty frustrated with this. Your engineering leadership's probably pretty frustrated with this. I know Kent talked a little bit this morning about dependencies, like cross-team dependencies. The teams that are downstream or upstream from you also probably frustrated with this. And then if we go back to just the pure dollars and cents of what we're spending on engineering, I would bet your finance people don't love those numbers either if 70% of your time is not spent coding. At the end of the day, though, ultimately, the person that feels the pain here is your customer, right? The slow delivery of the features that they need, potentially poor quality over switching gears or stopping and starting work all of the time, and really a loss of trust that we've promised things and not delivered them when we said we were going to deliver them. So everyone feels this pain of a lack of focus. All of these things compound pretty quickly, right? So wasted time isn't just about productivity. It's about focus. It's about effectiveness. And it's about being able to deliver when we say we're going to deliver something. All of these things kind of compound quickly, right? We talked about dependencies. We've talked about waiting for other teams. But the more this is happening inside your organization, the bigger the problem is going to become. And the more expensive, frankly, it's going to become. So what can we do differently? You don't need to overhaul everything. We're going to talk about a couple small practices here. But the main piece of what we want to focus on here, and hold on, hopefully the tent stays up for us. The main thing we want to think about here is how can we make the invisible visible? So much of what we do is hidden, and so much of the cost of not focusing on the right thing at the right time is hidden from us. It's hidden from leadership. So what we want to focus on is how can we start to expose all of those things that are preventing us from getting the work done that matters so that we can control the amount of work coming to our team, we can focus on getting things done quicker, and that we're really controlling how long it takes for that stuff to be completed. So a few of the talks today have talked about lean. How does lean fit into Agile? I know Dan was also saying that back in the day, a lot of the Agile conferences were actually called Lean Agile conferences. So you've probably seen some variation of these 6 types of waste in some fashion, right, from a lean perspective. There's a couple ways to think about the way these show up for us from software development. The first, overproduction sounds weird. I think that's a weird word to use. Think of this as like extra features, right? The things that you kind of add in just in case. We'll never get time to come back to this part of the code, so we're just going to add a couple things in here that have been bothering you. That's all going to be overproduction. These are things that are potentially small bets you're making on things that aren't needed and could end up costing you or taking your time away from the stuff that's more important. The next one is partially done work. Think of partially done work as really all the stuff that gets started and we never circle back to it. There can be a million reasons why this happens, right? It can be that it's too big, the scope isn't well defined, something higher priority comes up, but that's certainly a type of waste, that we've started something and we haven't finished it. And the longer it sits unfinished, the more it costs, right? We're sitting on undeployed code that has not given us a return on that investment. Defects are another one. Defects, while they are, like we said, writing code, just like tech debt, there is potential cost, right? Because it's pulling us away from working on new features or working on higher priority items. And a lot of times it requires context switching. I think, what is it? They say 20%, you lose 20% every time you switch your focus on a task. If you're doing that all day, like what's left, right? Of switching from meetings, switching from a defect, switching to a feature. All of those things, even if they're work-related, can be considered interruptions that might seem small, but are taking your focus away from something else that may matter more. Process. Let's talk process for a second. How many of the developers that raise your hand, how many of you are on Scrum teams? Keep your hand up if you feel like you sit in a lot of meetings as a result. Yeah, so think about all of the meetings required for things like Scrum, right? We have sprint planning, we have retrospectives, we have a daily stand-up. All of those things are also context switching. I would also bet that most of you are working across more than one time zone, which means it's not happening at the same time for everyone on your team, right? They're stopping work to go to these different events, to these different meetings, to participate in those conversations. Again, not to say that those aren't required. I'm just saying they can be very disruptive to your day. The last one here is waiting. I kind of touched on that at the beginning. These can be delays in decisions. If you work in a big company, you've probably felt that pain before, right? Just waiting for something to get decided around what to work on next or where to focus. There can be lots of delays in handoffs. There can be lots of delays where there's dependencies across teams to deliver one big feature together. All of these things are waiting, right? And again, that's waste. So these are our 6 types of waste in development, and these are probably a big part of why only 30% of your time is spent actually writing code. So let's talk about what we can do differently on a few of these items. All right. Our first one here is we're working on everything and finishing nothing. Does anybody feel that pain? We're very busy. Maybe your velocity is really high from a team perspective, but we're not actually getting anything done. If you've listened to a few of the other talks this morning, this is most often a result of having too many things in progress. When we talk about having too much work in progress or too much WIP, that can show up for us in a lot of different ways. I think the first one, and the one that we don't talk about enough, is this concept of cognitive overload. When you come in and there's 40 tickets on your board, knowing which one to talk about, which one to work on, which one to prioritize with your day, all of that requires cognitive load to make those decisions, right? That concept back to waiting all the time. So cognitive overload with a lot of work in progress is a real drain on our energy and on our focus. Context switching, like we said, if the more work you have in progress, you're more likely to be doing a lot of context switching. So pulling in one thing, starting on something else, all of that becomes really costly. Testing and code reviews. So even bouncing back and forth between different activities inside of your team or inside of your work, because there's so much work in progress, is also costing you time and money. All of these things, right? So all of these things become mental energy, time, and a drain on getting your work completed. Let's take a look at a pretty typical board. This one's from Jira. So if you were to come in to work today, or let's say Monday, you've been out for a few days, you're like, I just got back to work from this great conference. I don't know what to work on. What are some things you're gonna notice right away about this board? Well, you might notice that a handful of these people or the faces on these tickets are on 2 or 3 tickets. Well, maybe they're just way better at multitasking than you are, clearly. Clearly they can do it. Clearly they can work on all these tickets at the same time. But chances are probably they can't, right? They're working on one thing and the other 2 items that they've got assigned to themselves are just sitting there, right? So all of these things start to pile up as waste in our system. And then when you're coming to your team and saying, I'm ready to pick up new work, you don't know where to focus because there's all this stuff on the board that's already started. So where do we go? We're like, oh, you know what? I'll start on this one, right? I'll start on something that's in the to-do column because obviously that's what needs to get started next. But what we really want to start to think about is how can we start to move things to done without starting something new? And if I can see that someone on my team has 3 or 4 tickets assigned to them, maybe I could pick one of those up. Maybe I can help. All of this really starts to become about capacity. And as a team, how can we manage our capacity? When you think about work in progress, what we want to try to do is make our amount of work in progress match the capacity of our team. So think of an airport. If you've ever landed in an airport where you've landed on the runway and they've said, we don't have a gate to pull up to, so we're going to have to sit on the runway for 2 hours until a gate opens up. The number of planes coming in is outstripping the number of planes leaving the airport, so there's no more gates. So you sit. The same thing happens when we let more work come into our team than we have capacity to actually be working on it or actually be focusing on it. We're pulling that work in without capacity, and that work is sitting on your runway with probably a lot of really pissed off passengers, right? We thought we were going to land, that's my favorite. You land and they say, we're 45 minutes early, but now you have to sit here because, again, no gate. So when we think about work in progress, what we really want to start to do is figure out what's the capacity of our team in terms of how many things can we work on at the same time, and then how do we create a work in progress limit for our system to manage that capacity so that we're saying we can only have 10 planes land because there's only 12 people on this team or 12 gates available. So that's our first step. First step is manage capacity. The next one. Everything is urgent, so nothing is important. Anybody work in an environment like this? Yeah, I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years with security teams, and I did not know this when I started with them, but apparently they have like one of the highest rates of turnover in most organizations because this sucks. No one wants to live like this. So if everything's a fire and everything's urgent, then nothing is really important. So how do we start to create better focus for our teams? A big part of what we're trying to do from a focus perspective is make it really easy to see, when you have capacity, what's the most important thing for me to go work on next? Part of this is priorities and understanding what the highest priority items are. Some of it is just clarity, right, or team agreements around what is the most important thing to work on and how do I know where to spend my time. One of the things we really want to make sure we're doing is that we're not just constantly starting work from that to-do column, but we're focusing first on how to get things over the finish line. Now, I want to pause for a second. This doesn't mean that one of the questions I get most often is, are you telling me that I shouldn't work, right? If there's nothing I can contribute to on the board and we're at our WIP limits, you don't want me to do anything? Isn't my manager going to be mad if I'm not working? Well, way before I ever got into tech, I worked at a bar in the kitchen, and there were signs all over the kitchen that said, if you can lean, you can clean. So one way to think about this as we try to think about our focus and keeping a minimum amount of work in our system is, it's not so much that we shouldn't be doing anything when we're at capacity. It's really more about what could we be doing to further advance the work that's stuck in the system without starting something new? So I'm not saying you shouldn't work, and I'm not saying you should go to your boss and say, Colleen said if we're at our WIP limits that I get to go home for the day, but it's find something else to do. Do research, help with testing, help with code reviews, do something other than starting new work. All of this is going to help you with your team's focus. And this is going to help you start to really see the things that are the most important so you're not clogging up your system with a lot of noise. So if you were looking at this board, again, this is just I think this one's from Jira as well. Would you know what the most important item is to focus on here? Anybody see anything standing out? Suzanne definitely has too much work in progress. She's really hogging all the tickets. Anything else stand out in terms of priorities? Looks like everything on here seems to be a priority number 2. There's some red tickets. Those might be urgent. One of the things we want to start to think about when we're thinking about how to make priorities more clear is how can we look at something like this and make decisions quickly or make better decisions with more data in front of us. So you've got some colors in Jira. There's a few things you could do with that. You can color code your tickets by feature so that we know if we have a feature that is the number 1 priority for the organization. I could look at this board and say, the number 1 priority feature should be all the green tickets. I don't see any green tickets on our board. That seems like that might be a problem. Maybe it's not, but we want to have a conversation about that. Well, then there's some blue tickets. Let's talk about the blue tickets. What if that's the feature that's in 5th place for priorities? What does that tell us about what this team is working on right now? So this team may be working on a bunch of things that should be way lower down in terms of their priorities. And that means that we're probably spending a lot of energy on the things that are not the most important to the business. You can make this kind of prioritization visible at all levels of your organization. So if you're talking about features or epics or bigger items that you're trying to deliver, how can you make a system where you can say, our organization said 20% of our features should be innovation related, for example. I want to go look at a board and quickly say, there's no tickets on this board related to innovation, or there's 80% of our tickets are related to innovation. That's too many, right? So we want to start to create a system so that we can quickly make decisions and understand priority with real information. So mapping the alignment here to either business outcomes, strategic goals. I know somebody asked a question this morning around OKRs. Whatever your organization is doing, how can you make sure that the work that your team is working on is connected to that in the right way, so that you can make better decisions about where to spend your time? The next one here is that work gets stagnant and we don't make any progress on it. This happens a lot when we start things, like we said, and get pulled off to work on something different. But what often happens is we move that work out of the way. We can't see it anymore. It's like out of sight, out of mind. What happens in these cases is that work is aging, that code is aging, right? A lot of times we're building new stuff on top of that old code. So what we want to do instead is start to look at how old are the tickets in our system. When all this work is aging, right, one of the things that can often happen is you end up having to go back to it at some point, right? We pause work on this feature, on this ticket, so we can pick something else up, and 3 weeks go by. And then I say, can you go back and pick that ticket up that's on the board? Well, now you have to go back and figure out what you were working on, revisit the requirements, get up to speed with where you had left off in that code. All of these things, again, are taking your time away from writing great code and doing great work. The longer these tasks sit around, the more likely that the requirements have changed, the priorities have changed, the more likely it is that something can go wrong because it's just work that's sitting around. Stale code can also lead to a lot of problems when we go to merge it, right? So if you're trying to resolve merge conflicts or all this stuff on really old code, there's chances are we built a bunch of new stuff on top of it. That's also going to suck up a lot of your time. So how do we manage the age of work? It's probably no surprise here, but we just need to make it visible so we can see how old our work is. Can you imagine how much faster your stand-ups would be for the folks that said they were doing some kind of daily stand-up if your conversation centered around something like this? This ticket's been in progress 6 days. This ticket's been in progress 3 days. This ticket's been in progress 6 days. Which one should I spend my time on first? When we start to make age visible, we can have a really clear conversation about what to do about it. Typically, I would say for most of the teams I've worked with, as soon as age is visible, we start to have a conversation about how can we get it done as quickly as possible. That's not always true. I would say most of the time it is, but sometimes there's a ticket that's been sitting on your board for 2 weeks or 3 weeks because something else keeps getting prioritized above it. A lot can be wrong with that ticket, but if we don't make this visible, we can't have a conversation about how to address it. So what we want to start to think about is, what do we do with that work? Well, maybe somebody else needs to pick it up. Maybe I'm the only person that can work on a high priority item, so I'm going to ask Nick to grab this ticket. Or maybe this ticket's too big, and that's why it's taking us so much longer. In that case, how do we split that ticket into smaller tickets, right, so that we can focus on a smaller chunk of the work? There can be a lot of things and a lot of reasons why work gets stuck in our system and continues to age, but we can't fix it if we can't see it. So the first thing you want to do is make age visible on all of the tickets on your board. There's lots of great plugins for this. But you don't have to even have anything really that fancy. I would discourage you from relying on the dots in Jira, because we don't know how old that is. something's going on outside. We can't tell how old that is from the dots on the tickets, but what you can do is put the start date in front of the title of your JIRA story before you start working on it, and then just sort all the cards on your board by oldest date first. That's gonna start a great conversation about how long has this work been in progress. If your team struggles with a lot of carryover work in Scrum, where you're starting a bunch of stuff in one sprint, but it's taking more than 2 weeks to complete it, this is a great way to make that visible too. Chances are, if that's happening to you, maybe a 2-week sprint isn't the right time box for you. And some of this information will help you make that decision. So what we just talked about here is actually flow metrics. There's 4 key flow metrics: work in progress, throughput, cycle time, and work item age. When we talk about work in progress, this is the total number of actual work in your system, not the sum of WIP limits. So your actual work in progress may vary a little bit day to day, but our goal there, like we said at the beginning, is to make sure that the amount of work in our system matches the capacity of the team. Throughput is really simple. This isn't story points. This is just a raw count of how much work you get done for a given period of time. A lot of teams track this every 2 weeks or monthly throughput. You can even track it daily, depending on the nature of your work. And this is just telling you how much work did we get completed. Cycle time, I'm sure you've heard of. It is the amount of elapsed time between when a work item started and when it finished. How long does it take us to complete one story? Or how long does it take us to complete one feature? And the last one, and probably the most important one here, is work item age. That's what we were just talking about. That's the amount of elapsed time between when the work item started and today. So that's work that's not finished. When you think about those metrics, right, they're very simple. There's only 4. Chances are you can get all of that data out of your system now and have a bunch of really cool information about how your team's been working up until today. These metrics are really important for a few key reasons. When we think about a lot of the metrics we typically track around getting work done, burn down charts, velocity, take your pick, right? We won't talk about story points because that's a conversation over alcohol. But if you think about a lot of these metrics, what they're showing you is work that's done, right? And that can be helpful, and that's true of cycle time and throughput as well. But they're telling you about work that's already completed. You can't do anything about those numbers. They can help inform your process. They can help inform decisions about how your team works, but I can't make them better retroactively. When we think about flow metrics and things like the amount of work in our system or how old the tickets are in our workflow, that's something we can take action on right away. So it's giving you the tools to look at a board and look at the work that your team is working on and say, this is the most important thing, this is the oldest ticket in our system, this is the stuff that I need to get over the finish line first. All of those things are gonna help you focus and help you get more time and hopefully get out of a bunch of dumb meetings. The things we're talking about here are these concepts around using metrics to help manage your work. And when we think about flow of work through the system, what we're really trying to do is make data really easy to help inform that decision making so that you can make better decisions about what to spend your time on and ultimately make your customers happier, right? This is gonna help you build a more predictable system by keeping the same amount of work moving through from start to finish. A couple more concepts here. So I asked the question around who is a lead, who is a manager, who is a developer. What are the things that you can do every day to try to limit distractions for yourself, for your team? When you think about these distractions, we want to create a really easy system to point to say, no. This is hard. There's a million reasons why this is hard, right? To say, I can't start new work right now. So the first thing we have to do is make our system really clear. What are we working on? What is the amount of work in our system right now? And what are the trade-offs then if I pick up something new and stop something I've already started? When we think about these things, especially for folks that are leading teams, it becomes really important that you're also setting up your team by modeling these behaviors, right? So if a product owner or a product manager is coming to you asking you to pull something new in that's going to break the capacity that your team has, how do you start to have a conversation to say, we're really focused on getting this thing over the finish line, and we don't want to go over our WIP limits, because we're going to end up starting work that's just going to sit. Priorities, making our priorities visible. When you think about the priority piece of thing, think about understanding where we're going. I promised I would come back to the story that John shared about sheep. When I was is 4-H, I don't think 4-H is a thing outside of the US. It's like a farm club for kids. This is some deep sharing here. So I was in 4-H, and I had sheep. I had won a bottle-fed lamb in an essay contest. And one of the things they told me when I got this baby lamb was, you're going to have to run it. You have to run it to strengthen up its hindquarters, because when you go to fair, you pull the sheep up and you jam your thigh into their chest, and they push back on their hind legs, and the judge will feel his hindquarters, and that's how you win grand champion sheep. And I was like, okay, great. I think I was like 10 years old, and I was like, I'm playing basketball, I'm going for runs all the time. I'll harness this sheep up and run it up and down the dirt road. Sheep don't like that. So I would be out there trying to run the sheep, and it would somersault with this harness on its face into the dirt, and I would come home crying and dirty, and my knees all skinned up, all pissed off, because I was told I had to run this sheep to strengthen its hindquarters. And my dad said, I have a better idea. He took an old sawhorse and mounted a busted-ass kitchen sink to the sawhorse and plugged the bottoms up. And he put some boards across the front of the sawhorse so that the sheep would have to stand on their hind legs to eat and drink. And every time they got pretty comfortable, we would raise it up. And every time we got a little more comfortable, we would raise it up. So the year after that, I won grand champion and reserve grand champion with the sheep, because we knew what the outcome was we needed to drive to. We cut out all the noise. I didn't have to run them in a harness, but we knew where we were going. And I think this is often what we lack for a lot of our teams, right? We're busy. We're trying to do the best work we can. We're closing out our tickets, but we don't know where we're going. We don't know what the end goal is here. So what we want to be able to do is say, if our goal is to complete this feature, if our goal is to deliver this product for our customers, what are the things that we need to focus on to cut out all the noise and just deliver that great work? When we talk about uncertainty, does anybody drive with Google Maps on even though they know where they're going? I do it all the time, mostly because I hate traffic. A lot of what we're doing when we do something like that is we're looking for updated information, right? So much of what we do in software changes every day. Think of it like driving your car through the city and getting stuck in traffic. What's the information that you need to make visible to your team so that you're making great decisions in real time? That's going to probably be information that's changing every day. There's been a few talks already this morning about this concept of probabilistic forecasting. And there's some great books by Nick and Dan here in the front row on the concepts. If you're not using forecasting, this is a great way to help your teams reduce uncertainty and get out of a lot of estimation conversations. And the last one here is really thinking in terms of trade-offs. Now, I am married to a software developer, and this has fully backfired in my household, because when I ask my husband if he can do something, he always replies with, well, do you want me to take the trash out first, or would you rather have me unload the dishwasher? I'm always like, shit, I did this to myself. So think about this, though. With everything we do at work, from a focus perspective, from a effort perspective, it's all a game of trade-offs. So you can come to me and say, this is higher priority, I need you to start this work. You're always going to feel like you have to say yes if you can't have a good conversation with them about what are the costs and what are the trade-offs. I'm not promising that they're going to say, never mind, keep working on what you're working on and go back to their desk. But at least then you know that you could say, if I stop working on this ticket, I could have this ticket probably done tomorrow. if I can keep focusing on this alone, but if I stop this to pick up what you're talking about, we're not going to have this one done until next week. Now I have a decision to make because I have better information in front of me, and I know what the trade-offs are of what I'm asking you. So all of these things around developer focus really are about organizational health. Focused developers build better products at the end of the day. You're happier, you're less stressed out, you're more excited about the work and the things that you're building. And it gives us the opportunity to really create more visibility into the great things that we're producing. So before we go to questions, keep these flow metrics in mind. I know, Nick, you've got some free tools out there of how to get flow metrics out of a few different things that are available on Git, right? The Git repo. But you have this data. You have the data you need and the systems you use. You just have to make it visible. That's the best place you can start. Make WIP visible, make work item age visible, and have a better conversation with your stakeholders about the trade-offs of switching your focus. At the end of the day, distractions aren't just annoying. They're really, really expensive. And that's a cost that's hard to get back when you guys are annoyed and don't want to work at that company anymore and are ready to go look for a new job because you don't get to focus. There's a huge cost to that business, losing great talent. So think about it from this perspective. We want everybody in this room to be able to spend more time doing great work and less time managing the noise. Before we go to questions, like John said, I'm the CEO of prokanban.org. We have a huge Slack community that spends a lot of time nerding out on a lot of these charts, things like forecasting, sharing questions about how to get the data out of the tools you use. If you scan this QR code, it'll drop you right into our free Slack community. So, all right, let's go to questions.
Thank you, Colleen. Let's give a big round of applause for Colleen. A wonderful presentation. Outstanding job. So now I know how to get sheep's hindquarters really strong.
Right.
Slido, put your questions up. Oh, let's start. What is the most persuasive argument to leaders to motivate its shift from estimates to forecasting?
Great question. I would say, I think I want to say accuracy is a big part of this, but I think especially from an engineering leader's perspective, thinking about the amount of time that goes into estimating is usually a pretty great place to start. So go back to that metric, right? If 70% of your time is spent on non-coding activities, how much of that time is spent doing estimating activities? And you might go, your first thought might be, well, we just sit in a room for an hour once a week and story point things. But think about how much happens before you get in that room. The stories have to be perfect and well thought out and have really good requirements. That takes a ton of time and probably requires developer input. I would guarantee that it requires somebody's input. So we spend all this time trying to get our stories really perfect so our estimates are really perfect, and they never are. So if you think about this from a cost, time, trade-offs, is this the best use of your time as a developer? To spend all this energy reading stories that are 6 months out in your backlog, trying to guess how long they're going to take to develop? The best use of your time is going to be to keep writing code so that we can use that data around throughput and cycle time to more accurately forecast delivery.
Okay. We have multiple stakeholders with different priorities and commitments out of our control. How do you handle prioritization?
Yeah, so I think this is another one where visibility is going to be a great place to start the conversation. None of these things change overnight, but if you can start to highlight how your focus is spread across a lot of different priorities, then you can start to have a better conversation with your stakeholders. The more work that you're pulling in at a feature or epic level or project level, the more things you're spreading your focus across, the longer it's going to take to complete any of those items. And there's some cool tools. If anybody wants to connect afterwards, I'm happy to send you some links to some of the things we use at ProKanban that will help you highlight exactly what happens as the amount of priorities increases, because the more work you're pulling in and spreading your focus, it's just going to extend the timeline on everything you're doing.
Okay, cool. I skipped one. I like the concept to help somebody with WIP instead of starting a new task, but when I ask my colleagues if they need help, they feel insecure and mostly decline. I guess what they hear instead is that they are slow. How to show them it's okay to accept help.
Yeah. There's a saying in the Kanban community, manage the work, not the people. And I think that this is a really important concept when we're thinking about data. And as soon as you can start to make this data clear, it becomes less like I'm saying, John, why has your ticket been in progress for so long? What's wrong with you?
I can't code.
I know. There we go. Now you know. But instead of that being the conversation, I can say as a team, based on our data, our service level expectation is that any ticket we pull in, 85% of the time it should be done in 14 days or less. And it looks like your ticket's about to hit 15 days. Maybe we need to see if there's another developer that can help on it or swarm it, right? So now I'm having a conversation about the work and the data instead of calling you out for not knowing how to code.
Okay, thanks. I'll work with the sheep instead. Meetings often start as a means to foster communication, collaboration, or reflection, and this is important. However, they can also become a waste. Stand-ups, sprint plannings, retrospectives, your fixes, are good examples. Can be good, can become a waste. What are good metrics to optimize these?
Yes, I'd say they're almost always more waste than they are good, unfortunately. All the metrics we just talked about are a great place to start. I would say if you're not doing a retrospective that looks at your throughput data and your cycle time data, then you shouldn't be doing a retrospective. Ground that conversation in those metrics because you'll be able to marry up quantitative feedback and qualitative feedback to really see what's working or not working for your team. So that would be what I would start with from a retro perspective. You can use throughput data for planning, things like sprint planning, and that's going to make your planning meetings a lot faster, and it's also going to mean that you don't have to have 6 months of stories written and pointed in your backlog because you can just use that past throughput data to create a more accurate forecast for how much you can get done. So all of these metrics are really a great place to start those conversations so that they're more effective meetings, shorter meetings, and hopefully more useful for you in your time.
Okay. From what moment in time do you measure work item age? From when it's assigned to a developer, from when it's first added to a sprint?
Yeah, this is a great question. I did a fun post about this recently because my husband made a comment about how long it takes me to get ready in the morning. And I was like, I get ready, I don't know what you're talking about. I can be out the door in 20 minutes. And he was like, it takes you 45 minutes to get out of bed and 2 cups of coffee. And I was like, well, I count from when I'm out of the bed, clearly. This happens a lot for teams. When we think about how long does work take, we're probably all thinking about a different starting point. Your customer might have an idea of when work starts. Your product owner might have a different idea. You as a developer might be thinking when you pull the ticket into development. I can't answer that for you, but what you need to do is have this conversation as a team and make sure that you're very clear when work starts and when the clock starts. Some teams choose to start at a to-do column, so maybe you put a WIP limit on your to-do column of 3 tickets, and when that ticket gets moved into to-do, the clock starts. That might be, if you mentioned sprints here, that might be how you're managing that. You can track these numbers in more than one starting point. So if, as a developer, you want to see how long work is taking to move from dev to ready for test, you can make that visible to your team as well. The most important thing here is just that you're measuring it consistently.
Okay. Waiting time in my team is really getting out of hand. It is common that I'm waiting 2-3 days for my code to be reviewed. How can we improve this waiting time?
Again, visibility. I'm just going to keep saying visibility over and over. When you think about code reviews, I think it can be really helpful to separate out the development column from the code review column if this is a problem for your team. The one thing you have to be careful about is it's the same people doing the development as it is doing the code reviews. So if I have an in-development column and I have a team with 5 developers on it and I have a WIP of 5 in development and a WIP of 5 in code review, I'm always going to have something sitting idle. So if I'm thinking about how do I, back to capacity, right? How do I manage my capacity against those 2 different activities? I might say, we can have 3 items in development and 2 items in code review because it's the same people doing both work. But when teams struggle to focus on code review, I usually try to separate that out on the board so you can see where like the congestion's happening in your flow of work.
Okay, and finally, how to kickstart a fresh backlog for a brand new squad?
Don't. Backlogs, I think, are maybe one of the biggest time sucks in most of what we do. in engineering, and I think it's because we spend so much time trying to define work that we may never get to. I think the best way to think about how to keep your backlog, especially for a new team, moving quickly is to define the work just in time. You'll have to figure out what's the right amount of runway there, but I bet it's a lot less than you'd probably think. And it's going to help your developers immensely if you're reviewing the stories right before they start work. I think it's maybe one of the biggest failings of Scrum, that we spend so much time planning work and trying to estimate work, and then we don't start that work for months on end. Do it right before you start it. You're going to have a much better conversation and much better context about what you're going to be working on.
Okay, I just have one question. At the beginning, you said a developer spends approximately 30% of their time coding.
Yeah.
What do you consider a good metric? 60, 70, 50?
I don't know. I kind of want to know from them. I would hope it's more than half the time. I mean, if I was investing $10 million in the developers that we were talking about here, I would want more than half of that to be spent coding. I think it's what you guys all love to do and why you're in this field. So I would hope that more than half your time is going towards development activities.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah.
Thank you. And on behalf of Craft Hub, we'd like to give you a little gift for taking your time and coming to visit. They're socks.
I could use them. It's cold out there. All
Yeah,
right, thanks
okay.
everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you again.